My grandson lived under a bridge while his father denied him shelter. When I found James clutching his sick baby in the rain, he said, "Who are you?" I crouched down in the mud and replied, "I'm your grandmother." His shock was instant. But let me back up and explain how I got to that moment, standing in the rain under a highway overpass in Ohio, staring into the eyes of a grandson I'd never met. 3 weeks earlier, I was sitting in my corner office on the 47th floor of Sterling Financial Tower in Miami, reviewing quarterly reports for our real estate division. At 78, I should have been retired, but after my husband Spencer died 30 years ago, work became my only anchor. Sterling Properties had grown from Spencer's modest construction company into a $200 million real estate empire, and I'd built every bit of that growth myself. My assistant Margaret knocked and entered with a manila envelope. "Mrs. Sterling, this came by courier from Decker Investigations, marked confidential." I'd hired Decker's firm 3 weeks prior for a very specific purpose. After 3 decades of silence, I needed to know what had become of my son, Gregory, and his family. The report was devastating in its clinical precision. Gregory Sterling, age 58, currently unemployed after being fired from his investment advisor position for client misconduct. His wife, Brenda, worked part-time at a retail chain. They lived in a rented duplex in Columbus, their savings depleted by bad investments and Gregory's gambling debts. But it was the next page that stopped my breath entirely. James Spencer Sterling, age 28, Gregory's son, my grandson, recently laid off from his factory job, evicted from his apartment, currently homeless with his 18-month-old daughter, Sophie. The report noted that James had contacted his parents requesting temporary shelter and was denied due to financial constraints. Gregory was denying his own son shelter while I sat in a penthouse worth $3.2 million. The final item in the report was a photograph, grainy and taken from a distance. A young man sitting under a concrete overpass, holding a small bundle. Even in the poor quality image, I could see Spencer's features in his face. The same strong jawline, the same deep-set eyes that had captivated me 50 years ago. I set the report down and walked to my window overlooking Biscayne Bay. For 30 years, I'd convinced myself that Gregory's betrayal had severed all family ties. When he emptied our accounts and disappeared while Spencer was dying, I'd assumed I'd never see any of them again. Gregory had told me they were moving abroad, that they wanted nothing to do with us. I later learned he'd told James that Spencer and I were dead, but this young man, my grandson, he was innocent in all of this. And he was living under a bridge with a baby. I pressed the intercom button. "Margaret, I need you to arrange 3 things immediately. First, book the corporate jet to Columbus, Ohio. Second, contact Dr. Elena Vasquez at Miami Children's Hospital. She owes me a favor from the board restructuring last year. Tell her I need a pediatrician referral in the Columbus area who makes house calls. Third, call the Hilton downtown Columbus and book their presidential suite for a week." "Of course, Mrs. Sterling. May I ask about the timeline?" "I leave in 2 hours." The flight to Columbus gave me time to plan. As CEO of Sterling Properties, I'd learned that successful negotiations required 3 elements: superior information, financial leverage, and strategic patience. I had the first 2. The third would be tested. My driver, Thomas, met me at the private aviation terminal. I'd used his services in 6 different cities. He was discreet, professional, and never asked questions. "The coordinates from the report, ma'am?" "Yes, but drive by first, don't stop." The area was worse than I'd expected. Cracked pavement, abandoned lots, the kind of neighborhood where hope goes to die. The overpass loomed ahead, and I could see the makeshift camp underneath. Tarps, shopping carts, and there, against one of the concrete pillars, a small tent. "Pull over here," I instructed Thomas. "Keep the engine running." The rain started as I walked toward the encampment, my $800 Italian leather shoes sinking into the muddy ground. I dressed deliberately, expensive but practical. Black wool coat, simple jewelry. I wanted to project authority without ostentation. As I approached the tent, I heard the sound that would haunt me forever. A baby's weak, exhausted crying, not the healthy wail of an angry infant, but the desperate sound of a sick child. The tent flap was partially open. Inside, a young man knelt with his back to me, cradling a small bundle. His shoulders were shaking. Whether from cold or emotion, I couldn't tell. His clothes were soaked through, and I could see the outline of his ribs through his thin t-shirt. This was my grandson, Spencer's blood, living like an animal because my son had failed him just as completely as he'd failed us. "James Sterling?" I called out softly. He spun around so quickly it must have been painful, one arm instinctively tightening around the baby. His face was gaunt, stubbled, but unmistakably a Sterling. Spencer's eyes stared back at me, filled with suspicion and fear. "Who are you?" he demanded, shielding the baby from view. I crouched down, letting the rain soak through my coat. At my age, kneeling in the mud should have been impossible, but adrenaline and determination have their own power. "My name is Alice Sterling," I said clearly. "I know your father told you I was dead, but I am your grandmother." The look on his face in that moment, shock, disbelief, hope, and terror all competing, told me everything. Gregory had lied to him just as thoroughly as he'd lied to us. "That's impossible," James said, but his voice cracked. "My grandparents are dead, both sides." "Your father told you that, didn't he?" I kept my voice gentle but firm. "Gregory has told a lot of lies over the years. Your grandfather Spencer died 30 years ago, but I'm very much alive. And you, James Sterling, are living under a bridge with a sick baby when you have family who can help." The baby, Sophie, according to the report, let out another weak cry. I could see her flushed face, the way she moved listlessly in his arms. "She needs a doctor," I said. "When did she last see one?" James's defensive posture cracked slightly. 2 days ago, emergency room. They said it was just a cold, gave us some Tylenol and sent us away." His voice broke. "She's gotten worse." I stood slowly, extending my hand. "I have a car waiting. It's warm and dry. I can have a pediatrician meet us at my hotel within an hour, and there's food waiting. I'm not asking you to trust me, James. I'm asking you to make a practical decision for Sophie's sake." He stared at me for a long moment. This young man who was so clearly Spencer's grandson. The same analytical mind, the same protective instincts, the same careful weighing of options even in desperate circumstances. "1 hour, he finally said, struggling to his feet while keeping Sophie secure. "We go to your hotel. Sophie sees a doctor, then we talk. If I don't like what I hear, we leave." Agreed. The transformation from that muddy overpass to the presidential suite of the Hilton was surreal for all of us. James sat stiffly on the edge of a leather sofa, still holding Sophie, while Dr. Patterson, the pediatrician Dr. Vasquez had recommended, examined her on the king-sized bed. "Respiratory infection," Dr. Patterson confirmed, packing away her stethoscope. "She needs antibiotics immediately, another day or 2 without treatment, and this could have become pneumonia." She looked directly at James. "You got her help just in time." I watched my grandson's face crumble with relief and delayed terror. How close had we come to losing her? After Dr. Patterson left with promises to check on Sophie the next day, James finally agreed to put her down in the portable crib the hotel had provided. I'd ordered room service. Simple food, nothing fancy, but plenty of it. "Why are you doing this?" James asked as he ate. I noticed he was pacing himself, trying not to appear desperate despite obviously being famished. "Because 30 years ago, your father stole everything your grandfather and I had built together and disappeared. Your grandfather Spencer died of a heart attack when he discovered our accounts were empty. Gregory told us he was moving abroad and wanted no contact. He told you we were dead. We've each been victims of his lies." James set down his fork. What do you mean, stole everything? I opened my briefcase and withdrew a folder I'd brought from Miami. Bank statements, police reports, documentation I'd kept all these years. Your grandfather started Sterling Construction in 1955 with $500 and a pickup truck. By 1990, we had built it into a multi-million-dollar company. Your father was supposed to take it over. I slid a police report across the table. Instead, he emptied our business accounts, our retirement fund, and our emergency savings. $2.3 million. Gone in one weekend. James studied the documents, his analytical mind, so like Spencer's, processing the information. Why didn't you prosecute? Spencer died before we could. I was 48 years old, suddenly widowed, with a business in ruins and no family left. I spent the next 30 years rebuilding what Gregory destroyed. And now? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Now Sterling Properties is worth over $200 million. I own 47 commercial buildings, 12 residential developments, and have a real estate investment portfolio that generates $18 million annually. I rebuilt everything Gregory tried to destroy, then made it 10 times larger. James leaned back, clearly overwhelmed. So you're wealthy? Yes, but more importantly, I'm family. Your family, Sophie's family. I paused, watching him process this. James, I want to make you an offer. Come back to Miami with me. Not permanently, just until you get back on your feet. Sophie can receive proper medical care. You can rest and recover, and we can get to know each other. When you're ready to be independent again, I'll help you get established wherever you want to go. Why should I trust you? The question was fair, direct. I mean, assuming you're telling the truth about being my grandmother, you've been alive for 28 years and never tried to contact me. Because I didn't know you existed until 3 weeks ago. I pulled out the investigator's report. I hired private investigators to find out what happened to Gregory's family. That's when I learned about you and Sophie. The report said you'd contacted your parents for help and were refused. That's when I knew I had to act. James was quiet for a long time, looking between the documents and his sleeping daughter. The job I lost, it was a good job. 5 years, steady pay, benefits. I wasn't irresponsible. The plant closed, moved production to Mexico, laid off 300 people with 2 weeks' notice. I understand. And Olivia, Sophie's mother, she left when the money ran out. Just packed up one day while I was job hunting and moved in with her ex-boyfriend. Left Sophie with me because she said she couldn't handle the stress. My heart ached for this young man who'd been abandoned by everyone who should have protected him. I'm not going anywhere, James, and I'm not looking for anything from you except the chance to know my granddaughter and help my grandson. The next morning, we flew to Miami on my corporate jet. James spent the 2-hour flight staring out the window in wonder, while Sophie, already responding to the antibiotics, babbled happily in his arms. Sterling Estate sprawled across 8 acres in Coral Gables, a Mediterranean-style mansion Spencer and I had built in the 1980s. James's expression as we drove through the gates told me everything. This was far beyond anything he'd imagined. "This is where you live?" he asked as we pulled up to the main house. "This is where we live," I corrected. "For as long as you want." I'd prepared the guest wing carefully, a master bedroom for James with an adjoining nursery for Sophie, both overlooking the gardens. Maria, my housekeeper, had stocked the nursery with everything a toddler could need, and Dr. Rodriguez, our family pediatrician, was scheduled to examine Sophie that evening. For the first 3 days, James barely left his rooms. The trauma of homelessness doesn't heal quickly, and I understood his need to decompress safely. Maria reported that he was eating regularly and that Sophie was improving rapidly with proper care. On the 4th evening, I was in Spencer's old study reviewing contracts when James appeared in the doorway. "May I come in?" "Of course." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "How are you settling in?" "It's overwhelming," he admitted. 6 months ago, I was living paycheck to paycheck in a one-bedroom apartment. 3 months ago, I was sleeping in my car. Last week, I was under a bridge. Now I'm in a mansion with staff and a pediatrician making house calls. It's a lot to adjust to, I agreed. But James, this isn't charity. This is family taking care of family, something your father forgot how to do. He was quiet for a moment, looking around the study with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and Spencer's old desk. Tell me about my grandfather. My real grandfather, not whatever lies my father told. I opened Spencer's photo albums and spent the next 2 hours sharing memories. Spencer building our first house with his own hands. Spencer teaching Gregory to use tools, to understand construction, to value honest work. Spencer's pride when Gregory graduated from business school. Spencer's devastation when Gregory chose money over family. He wanted grandchildren so badly, I said, showing James a photo of Spencer in his workshop. He built a wooden rocking horse when your father was born, and another when your parents got married, hoping for grandchildren. They're still in the attic. I'd like to see them, James said quietly. The next morning, we climbed to the mansion's third-floor storage area. Among the carefully preserved items from Spencer's life, we found the rocking horses, beautiful handcrafted pieces that represented dreams deferred for 30 years. Sophie would love these, James said, running his hand over the smooth wood. Then let's bring them down to the nursery where they belong. As James carried the smaller rocking horse downstairs, I made a decision that had been building for days. It was time to discuss the future, not just James's immediate recovery, but his long-term prospects. That evening, over dinner, I broached the subject carefully. James, you've been here a week. You're both healthy, Sophie is thriving, and you're starting to look like yourself again. I want to discuss what comes next. His expression grew guarded. I've been looking at job postings online. There are some manufacturing positions in the area, and I could find an apartment nearby. Manufacturing? I interrupted. James, you have a business degree, don't you? Yes, but in this economy, you take what you can get. I leaned forward. What if I told you that Sterling Properties has an opening for an entry-level project coordinator, someone to work with our development teams, coordinate with contractors, manage timelines? His eyes narrowed slightly. I'd say it sounds like nepotism. Fair point. So let me be clear, this wouldn't be a gift. You'd interview with our HR department like any other candidate. If hired, you'd start at the bottom, work your way up based on merit, and likely work longer hours than you've ever worked before. I paused. But you'd also be learning a business that's been in your family for 70 years. Why? He asked. Why offer me this? Because Spencer always believed that Sterling Construction, now Sterling Properties, should stay in the family, because you have his work ethic and his integrity, because you understand what it means to fight for something that matters. I met his gaze directly. And because giving you a job fixes multiple problems, you get a career path. Sophie gets stability, and I get to start training my successor. James was quiet for a long time. Your successor? I'm 78 years old, James. I've spent 30 years building this company into something Spencer would be proud of, but I won't live forever. I need someone who understands that we're not just in the real estate business. We're in the business of building homes where families feel safe. 2 days later, James interviewed with our HR director, Rebecca Martinez, and our operations manager, David Foster. I deliberately stayed away from the process, letting him succeed or fail on his own merits. Rebecca called me that afternoon. Mrs. Sterling, your grandson interviewed well. He's analytically sharp, asks good questions, and clearly understands project management. David was impressed with his practical experience. Apparently, he reorganized his factory's entire production flow and increased efficiency by 22%. So you're recommending we hire him? Based on his qualifications? Absolutely. Based on his family connection? Well, that's above my pay grade. I smiled. Hire him, Rebecca, and make sure he knows it was your decision, not mine." James started work the following Monday in our downtown Miami office. I gave him space to prove himself, receiving weekly reports from his supervisors but never interfering. The reports were consistently positive. James approached every task with methodical thoroughness, stayed late to master new software, and quickly earned the respect of his colleagues. By his 3rd month, he was leading small development projects. By his 6th month, he was coordinating with architects and contractors on multi-million-dollar builds. By his 1st anniversary, he was promoted to senior project coordinator with a salary of $95,000. More than he'd ever earned in his life. Sophie, now 2.5, thrived in our household routine. She called me Grandma Alice and had Maria wrapped around her tiny finger. The mansion, empty for so many years, finally felt like a home again. But it was James's approach to real estate development that truly convinced me he was Spencer's heir. Where other project coordinators focused on timelines and budgets, James obsessed over details that impacted families. He insisted on playground equipment and family developments, pushed for energy-efficient appliances to reduce utility costs, and personally walked every property to ensure quality construction. "Houses aren't just investments," he explained to a client meeting I observed. "They're the foundation for family memories. The kitchen where birthday cakes get baked, the backyard where kids learn to ride bikes, the guest room where grandparents stay for holidays. If we build them right, they'll matter for generations." Spencer couldn't have said it better. By James's 2nd year, I was ready to implement the next phase of my long-term plan. Sterling Properties needed a CEO who could take it into the next generation, and James had proven himself capable of handling that responsibility. But first, there was unfinished business to address. My private investigator's quarterly report arrived on a Tuesday morning. Gregory and Brenda's financial situation had continued deteriorating. Gregory had been fired from 2 more jobs for poor performance, and they were facing eviction from their duplex. According to the surveillance report, Gregory had been calling former business associates, asking for loans and dropping hints about his wealthy mother and successful son. It was time for a confrontation. I had my assistant, Margaret, book flights to Columbus and arrange for a rental car. I didn't tell James where I was going. Some conversations needed to happen without witnesses. Gregory and Brenda were home when I knocked on their door Thursday afternoon. The duplex was a far cry from the suburban house they'd owned 30 years ago, but it was clean and reasonably maintained. Gregory opened the door, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. He was 58 now, gray-haired and soft around the middle, his face showing the wear of financial stress and poor choices. But he was still unmistakably my son. "Hello, Gregory," I said calmly. His face went white, then red, then settled into a wary expression. "Mother, what are you doing here?" "May I come in? We need to talk." Brenda appeared behind him, curious and suspicious. She'd aged better than Gregory, but I could see the strain around her eyes. I entered their small living room and took a seat without invitation. "Nice place, much more modest than the house you bought with your father's money 30 years ago." Gregory's jaw tightened. "We've had some setbacks." "I know exactly what setbacks you've had, Gregory. I also know you've been calling people, hinting about family money and your successful son who might be able to help with your financial problems. How do you—" He stopped himself. "I've been keeping track of you for 30 years, son. I know about every job you've lost, every debt you've accumulated, every lie you've told." I opened my purse and withdrew a folder. "But what I didn't know until recently was that you had denied shelter to your own son and granddaughter." Brenda spoke for the first time. "We couldn't afford to take them in. We were having problems of our own." "Problems of your own," I repeated softly. "Tell me, Brenda, what kind of problems prevent you from letting a baby sleep on your couch?" Gregory found his voice. "We didn't have room." "This is a 2-bedroom duplex, Gregory. You couldn't make room for your son and his sick child?" I leaned forward. Do you know where I found James 3 months ago? Neither of them answered. Under a highway bridge in the rain, holding Sophie while she burned with fever. That's where your lack of room left your grandson. We didn't know, Brenda started. You didn't want to know, I interrupted. Just like you didn't want to know the impact of stealing from your father. Do you know how Spencer died, Gregory? My son's face went pale. Heart attack. Natural causes. Spencer died sitting in his study, staring at the empty safe where our life savings had been. The doctor called it a heart attack, but I know better. Your father died of a broken heart, betrayed by the son he loved more than his own life. The room was silent except for the ticking of a cheap wall clock. But I didn't come here to relitigate the past, I continued. I came to discuss the future. James and Sophie are living with me now in Miami. James works for Sterling Properties and is doing exceptionally well. Sophie is healthy, happy, and calls me Grandma Alice. Gregory straightened slightly. James is working for you? He's working for the company his grandfather built, yes. The company you walked away from to steal from us instead. I smiled coldly. Sterling Properties is now worth over $200 million, Gregory. James will inherit all of it. I could see the wheels turning in Gregory's head. That's wonderful. I mean, we're so glad James is doing well. No, I said firmly. You don't get to be glad now. You don't get to pretend to care now that there's money involved. I stood and walked to their window, looking out at the modest neighborhood. Gregory, I'm going to make this very simple for you. You are not to contact James. You are not to contact Sophie. You are not to use the Sterling name in any business dealings or when seeking employment. You can't. Gregory started. Actually, I can. I returned to my seat and pulled out a legal document. This is a restraining order preventing you from contacting James or Sophie. It also includes a non-disclosure agreement regarding Sterling Properties business information. I set a second document on the coffee table. This is a cease and desist order preventing you from using the Sterling name professionally. Gregory's face flushed. He's my son. No, Gregory. A son is someone you protect, someone you shelter, someone you put before your own comfort. James learned what kind of son he was when you left him under a bridge. I stood to leave. You gave up all parental rights the day you chose to let your child and grandchild live homeless rather than sleep on your couch. Brenda finally spoke up. This isn't fair. We made mistakes, but we're still family. I turned to look at her. Family? Brenda. When Spencer was dying and our savings were gone, when I was facing bankruptcy and homelessness myself, did you ever once call to check on me? Did you ever think to ask if your husband's elderly mother-in-law needed help after losing her husband and her livelihood simultaneously? She had the grace to look ashamed. I spent 30 years believing I had no family left, I continued. 30 years grieving not just for Spencer, but for the grandchildren I thought I'd never know. You stole that from me just as surely as Gregory stole our money. I headed for the door, then turned back one final time. I'm going to give you both some advice. James has become a remarkable young man despite having you as parents. Not because of it. He has Spencer's integrity, Spencer's work ethic, and Spencer's heart. If you have any shame left at all, you'll stay away from him and let him build the life he deserves. The drive back to Miami gave me 6 hours to process the confrontation. I felt no satisfaction from it, but I felt closure. The cycle of damage that Gregory had started 30 years ago was finally broken. James was waiting when I got home, Sophie asleep in his arms as he read in Spencer's old study. "Where did you go?" he asked. "Maria said you flew to Ohio." I settled into my usual chair and looked at this young man who had brought life back to our family home. "I went to see your parents." His expression didn't change, but I saw him tense slightly. "Why?" "Because they've been making inquiries about your success. hinting that they might be able to benefit from your position at Sterling Properties. I wanted to make it clear that would not be happening. James was quiet for a moment. What did you tell them? The truth, that they forfeited any claim to family loyalty when they left you under a bridge, that you and Sophie have a new life now, one they have no part in. And I told them to stay away. I met his gaze directly. James, I want you to know that choice was mine, not yours. If you want a relationship with Gregory and Brenda, that's your decision. But it will be on your terms, not theirs. James shifted Sophie in his arms, looking down at her peaceful face. The night you found us, I had called them one more time, not asking for money, not asking for anything permanent, just asking if Sophie and I could sleep on their couch until I found work. He paused. Gregory told me they couldn't help, that I needed to figure things out on my own, that taking us in would be enabling my irresponsibility. I felt anger flare again at the memory of finding them under that bridge. The thing is, James continued, I think I knew even then that they weren't going to change. Some people are takers, and they'll keep taking until there's nothing left to take. You and Grandpa Spencer learned that 30 years ago. I learned it 3 months ago. So what do you want to do? I want to focus on the family I have, not the family I don't. He looked up at me. You saved us, Alice. Not just from homelessness, not just from poverty, but from becoming like them. Sophie is going to grow up knowing what family loyalty actually means. 6 months later, I made James Sr. Vice President of Development. A year after that, I announced my retirement and named him CEO of Sterling Properties. He was 30 years old, owned a $2 million home in Coconut Grove, and had a trust fund that would ensure Sophie never wanted for anything. But more importantly, he had carried on Spencer's legacy of building homes where families felt safe. The final chapter in this story came 2 years after I'd confronted Gregory and Brenda. My investigator reported that they'd moved to a cheaper apartment after being evicted from the duplex. Gregory had taken a job at a furniture warehouse, his career in financial services permanently derailed by poor references and a reputation for unreliability. They'd made one attempt to contact James directly, showing up at his office building and trying to get past security. James had them escorted out and increased security protocols. They hadn't tried again. Meanwhile, James had transformed Sterling Properties from a successful regional company into a national powerhouse. We'd expanded into 6 southeastern states, specializing in family-oriented developments that prioritized community over luxury. James insisted every project include playgrounds, community gardens, and affordable housing options. Spencer would be proud, I told him, as we reviewed the latest financial reports in his corner office, the same office where Spencer had started with a card table and a rotary phone. I hope so, James replied, watching Sophie play in the adjoining conference room that we'd converted into a family space. At 5, she was precocious, curious, and already showing signs of the Sterling analytical mind. There's something else Spencer would want you to know, I said, reaching into my desk drawer. I withdrew a letter I'd been saving for this moment, written in Spencer's careful handwriting. I found this among his papers after he died, but I wasn't ready to read it then. It's addressed to his future grandson. James took the letter with trembling hands. As he read Spencer's words of advice, hopes for the future, and dreams of the family he'd never gotten to meet, tears rolled down his face. He knew, James said softly. Somehow he knew there would be a grandson who'd need to hear this. Spencer believed in the future, even when the present was breaking his heart. That's the real Sterling legacy. Not the money, not the business, but the faith that family can overcome anything when they choose love over selfishness. As I watched James hug Sophie and show her the picture of great-grandfather Spencer that had accompanied the letter, I knew the cycle was complete. The damage Gregory had inflicted 30 years ago was finally healed, replaced by something stronger and more valuable than money. We'd rebuilt more than a business. We'd rebuilt a family.